Madam Speaker, I rise to lead the debate of and have read for the second time in this Honourable House the bill shortly titled Anti-Corruption Bill 2023. Madam Speaker, this is a momentous day for our Federation. Today, on the first day of Lent, in this hallowed hall, the men and women on this side of the floor are fulfilling their undertaking to our people and the wider global community to implement a fundamental change in the way government does business in our Federation. Madam Speaker, it wasn't deliberately planned to debate the good governance legislation on Ash Wednesday, the beginning of a time of solemn observance and preparation for the celebration of the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ at Easter. However, God moves in mysterious ways. If it is His will, it shall be. It therefore gives me great joy and pride to be given the opportunity by my elected friends and colleagues to declare loudly and clearly for all to share, Petitions, Divisions, home and abroad, good governance is finally here. Whilst persons outside this building seek to distract our people in every way imaginable, we have been working diligently behind the scenes in every arm of government to ensure that the sustainable island state envisioned by our leader, the Honourable Prime Minister, and member for number 8, can soon become a reality. Transparency and accountability are finally becoming a part of our societal and political DNA. The opaque, clandestine, corrupt style of governance of our recent past has finally come to an end. Madam Speaker, we sit and stand here today for this noble cause because of the strong will of the good people on this side of the Assembly and the dedicated effort of the hard-working team at the Attorney General's office. Creating revolutionary legislation is not easy. It involves late nights, family life sacrifices, and sometimes walking alone in the dark night on a lonely path through the raging storm of constant personal attacks from enemies of mature democracy. This is not an easy job, Madam Speaker. But the sacrifices made now will inure to the benefit of generations of petitions and divisions to come, and everything happens for a reason. For as the word of the Lord says, do not be deceived. God cannot be mocked. A man reaps what he sows. Whoever sows to please their flesh, from the flesh will reap destruction. Whoever sows to please the Spirit, from the Spirit will reap eternal life. Let us not become weary in doing good, for at the proper time we will reap a harvest if we do not give up. Therefore, as we have an opportunity, let us do good to all people. End quote. Madam Speaker, we on this side know that we are doing good for our people. The advancement of our people is our top priority. I repeat, today is a momentous day in our history because this anti-corruption bill, if it receives safe passage, will signal a new day and a better way for our people. Many may ask, why this bill? Why at this time? Why is anti-corruption legislation so important? How does it fit into our government's long-term strategy? To answer those questions, one has to be first clear on what corruption is and what it does to a society. At its core, corruption is the use of power for private gain. It is a societal ill motivated by greed and practiced by greedy men and women. The use of power for private gain involves abuse of the capacity or ability to direct or influence the behavior of others or the course of events. Private gain doesn't necessarily mean gain for your own self or family, but also gains for associates and cronies, which divert state funds or assets to the detriment of the people of a country. In a recent UNDP article titled "The Cost of Corruption," the following was reported, and I quote, "Corruption is one of the scourges of modern life. Its costs are staggering. Of the approximately US $13 trillion that governments spend on public spending, up to 25% is lost to corruption. International bribery is thriving. More than half of all cases are related to public spending. In Europe, 28% of all health industry corruption cases are related to medical equipment. And in the EU, 1 in 5 people pay bribes for healthcare. From 2000 to 2015, the illegal money leaving Africa amounted to $836 billion US, amounting to 3.7% of its GDP. But the costs are not just financial. Corruption is also paid for in human potential. Corruption stands in the way of the Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs, and the 2030 Agenda. It has taken money that could have been invested in governance, social protection, transitioning to the green economy, the SDG push designed to prevent 169 million people from being driven into extreme poverty by 2030. Corruption in health systems accounts for an estimated 1.6% of deaths of children under 5, more than 140,000 a year. And of the US $7.5 trillion that is spent every year on health, US $500 billion is lost to corruption. In countries with high levels of corruption, governments spend 25% less on health and 58% less on education. Anywhere between 1.4 to 35% of climate action funds have been lost to corruption. Madam Speaker, an example of corruption may be useful. Imagine there's an international company that manufactures and sells streetlights to governments. There's a need to replace thousands of broken and energy inefficient streetlights in Bastia, for example. The minister with responsibility for public infrastructure is leading the charge in finding a lighting solution. The CEO of the international streetlight manufacturer company meets with the minister and says, "Listen, minister, we have 20,000 streetlights that we are ready to sell to your country to meet your needs. However, minister, the ones we have, they are leftover versions of our old technology. They burn triple the electricity of our modern streetlights, so we cannot sell them into first world countries. And they will only last 3 years, as opposed to the 20-year lifespan for modern streetlights. Minister, we can sell you these lights for $4 million US, $1 million US less than you would pay for the modern, long-lasting, energy-efficient streetlights sold by us and our competitors. Except I will give you $1 million US under the table to make the deal happen." If the minister accepts the bribe, the country will end up spending $4 million US on streetlights that will cost the government hundreds of thousands of dollars more in electricity charges annually and need to be replaced after 3 years, rather than 20 years. Meaning, the government will have to spend another $5 million US in 3 years and replace the outdated streetlights, rather than having modern, energy-efficient streetlights for 20 years. If the minister chose to do the right thing and purchase modern, energy-efficient streetlights, millions of dollars could have been saved and otherwise injected into social programs or education. Corruption like this touches and concerns all of us, Madam Speaker. It is the honest taxpayer and hard-working men and women who pay the price when government funds, which should go to provide essential services, are siphoned off into the pockets of public officials and their private conspirators and cronies. Corruption also drains an economy and grows like a cancer until it destroys the system of government. Some countries have reached the point where no simple transaction, such as passing your driver's license test, can be completed without paying a bribe to a public official. Do we want SKNIS and SKNIS to be like that? It is loud and clear from the public, private, and global calls for good governance that this government has determined that the best way to reduce corruption in our federation is to construct and preserve 3 legislative pillars of protection. The first being the Anti-Corruption Act, the second being the Integrity in Public Life Act, and the third being the Freedom of Information Act. The objects of the Anti-Corruption Bill 2023 are to 1, establish the types of corrupt conduct that should be criminalized. 2, establish a dedicated special prosecutor's office to receive complaints, investigate and prosecute persons in public life and others who participate in corruption in the public sector. 3, ensure that all persons in public life are subject to measures that promote integrity and deter and combat corruption. 4, encourage and facilitate the reporting of corrupt activities. And 5, encourage the investigation and prosecution of corruption offenses and the recovery and return of the proceeds of crime. The Anti-Corruption Bill does 4 main things, Madam Speaker. It defines who is a person in public life bound by the provisions of the bill. It creates special corrupt conduct offences. It creates the office of the special prosecutor, and it sets out the legislative jurisdiction in which the special prosecutor acts. Who is a person in public life, Madam Speaker? The net is purposefully wide. It includes all persons within the public service who hold public service roles in the federal government and the NIA. With respect to statutory corporations and authorities, it includes directors, employees, and continuous service contractors. With respect to state-owned or majority state-owned banks or companies, it includes directors, CEOs, and general managers. The wide net applied to the anti-corruption bill was created to ease the pressure on the Integrity Commission to allow them to focus on review of declarations and other matters involving high-level public officials only. Madam Speaker, what are examples of corrupt conduct as specified in the legislation, the proposed bill? Gifts. A person in public life demanding, accepting, or receiving gifts, favors, hospitality, or any other benefit for himself or herself, his or her family, close relatives and friends, or persons or organizations with whom he has or has had business or political relationship, which may influence or appear to influence the impartiality with which he carries out his or her duties, or may be or appear as a reward relating to his or her duties. Such gifts, favors, hospitality, or any other benefit do not include conventional and good faith hospitality or minor gifts, favors, or other benefits, the rejection of which will cause embarrassment to the offerer or grantor. Misuse of information. A person in public life misusing information acquired in the course of his or her duties to obtain a personal or private benefit of any nature for himself or herself, members of his or her family, or any other person associated with the person in public life. Bribery. A person in public life soliciting, seeking, accepting, promising to take, or taking any bribe, valuables, loan, reward, advantage, or other personal or private benefit for himself or herself, members of his or her family, or any other person associated with the person in public life, in return for promising to perform or performing, or promising to refrain from performing or refraining from performing his or her official duties. Disproportionate wealth. A person in public life acquiring, directly or indirectly, property or pecuniary resource disproportionate to his or her legitimate sources of income. The Special Prosecutor, Madam Speaker. The Governor General may, acting in accordance with the recommendation of the Public Service Commission, after consultation with the Judicial and Legal Services Commission, appoint an attorney at law as a special prosecutor. The special prosecutor may investigate and prosecute a person in public life for a criminal offense of corrupt conduct, a civil claim related to corrupt conduct, and for this purpose, the special prosecutor is deemed to have the authority to investigate, institute, carry on, or do any other thing and exercise any other function related to such power. Madam Speaker, the functions of the special prosecutor are to receive complaints from any person, including either Integrity Commission to receive complaints from any person, including either Integrity Commission, and that language is because there are two Integrity Commissions in our Federation, one in Nevis and one in St. Kitts, of conduct related to offences created from time to time by the ancillary legislation. To report or facilitate the reporting of complaints to the Director of Public Prosecutions, to institute and prosecute a criminal prosecution in a court against a person in public life if the conduct of the person in public life appears to the special prosecutor on reasonable grounds to involve corrupt conduct. To institute and take carriage of a civil claim in a court. To prosecute a criminal offense for corrupt conduct or conduct related to offenses created by the ancillary legislation referred to him or her by the Director of Public Prosecutions, and to pursue, coordinate, and supervise civil recovery arising from corrupt conduct or conduct related to offenses created by the ancillary legislation referred to him or her by the Attorney General. Madam Speaker, as a former prosecutor, you'll be well aware that these are wide powers that a special prosecutor will have. Where the special prosecutor, and I think this is important to note, Madam Speaker, where the special prosecutor intends to institute or withdraw a prosecution against a public official, the special prosecutor must first seek consent in writing from, one, the Director of Public Prosecutions. The reason this is because under our Constitution, the Director of Public Prosecutions has the power and right to bring and to discontinue all criminal actions. So it is natural that the special prosecutor first has to get permission from the DPP. And if it involves high-level public officials, permission should also be given or sought from the Integrity Commission, to whom the public official is mandated to present declarations. Where the special prosecutor intends to institute or withdraw prosecution against any public officer, that is the general public servants, the special prosecutor must first seek consent in writing from the DPP, and after such consent, the special prosecutor may initiate and prosecute a matter in the name of the special prosecutor. It is important to note, Madam Speaker, that persons who propose bribes to persons in public life can also be subject to investigation by the special prosecutor, and persons in public life have a statutory obligation to report any persons who offer them bribes. The duty to report provision states that the person in public life to whom any advantage or other benefit is given, promised, or offered for the purposes of engaging in corrupt conduct or in anticipation of corrupt conduct shall report the incident to the special prosecutor within 28 days and shall include the name of the person who made the offer, if known. Madam Speaker, the purpose of that section is to discourage the persons who wish to influence persons in public life to act in corrupt ways as well. So not just the persons in public life, but the persons who seek to get some benefit through bribes or other incentives. Madam Speaker, as I wrap up, I feel it necessary to quote a man who I personally respected immensely, Sir K. Dwight Venner, former governor of our central bank, who in a 1999 report said as follows, and I quote, "The citizen's central role is to participate in the process of government by casting their vote. The naive question to be asked then is, in exchange for what? The equally naive answer, of course, is good governance. The next question then becomes, what is good governance and what does it cost? Good governance has certain basic elements, such as the maintenance of law and order, an acknowledgement of the importance of equity and fair play, and an environment in which citizens have the opportunity to grow to their fullest potential. The actions of government and the private sector must be transparent and accountable, and corruption should be strongly discouraged. Good governance is also connected to the expectations of the population in what they regard as the appropriate standard of living and quality of life. This would start with the provision of basic services to the entire population. It is clear that governance is now an international issue, and that all countries, if they are to be included in the international community of nations and require access to external resources, must meet certain basic obligations to that community. One can therefore conclude that the quality of governance and economic management are critical elements in the process of nations and become even more become even more so as we move into the new century. The role of government and the concept of governance in all states, and in particular extremely small states such as ours, is of paramount importance for economic and social development. In very small societies with small populations and very narrow resource bases, where the margin for error is extremely small, the role of effective government cannot be overlooked or taken for granted. It can be the difference between success and disaster. There are in fact some intrinsic values which the citizenry at large would like to see manifested in their political representatives, which would single them out as role models and not as objects of distrust. The following outline below seem to strike some resonance with the public at large. Leadership and organizational skills, principles and ethics, maturity and wisdom, humility and tolerance, objectivity and rationality, widely read and open-minded, capacity to learn and to listen, capacity to exercise good judgment. This is not to suggest that the public is desirous of having saints or choir boys as their representatives. In fact, the Caribbean public is very tolerant of foibles of their representatives. There is, however, the distinct impression that the public desires quality representation by the men and women who offer themselves for public service. This bill, end quote. This bill, Madam Speaker, is the first step in encouraging quality representation and ensuring that our country will no longer tolerate greedy, corrupt men and women in our public service by establishing the protection and prevention mechanisms for this generation and future generations. Madam Speaker, I again declare loudly and clearly for all to share: petitions, divisions, home and abroad, good governance is finally here. Madam Speaker, with those few words, I pray for the anti-corruption bill's safe passage. May it please you.